Hello, advanced English learners. Greg and MD here for another advanced English conversation. Today, we're talking about improving fluency because fluency means that you're communicating well, you're communicating in a way that is not, restricted in any way, that you're able to express yourself the way that you like to express yourself.
Yeah, I think of fluency like a river. How smooth is the flow, and when you feel fluent, you can speak with more confidence and more authority. So it's always nice to sort of increase your influency, your fluency.
I love that.
Yeah.
When we speak multiple additional languages, and I think for both of us, like when we got to that point of fluency in our other languages, it's just such a nice feeling that you're able to converse with someone without having to pause every 5 minutes and see, what does that word mean? What was that?
Right.
Didn't catch that.
And to convey your meaning. That's, for me, one of the most important objectives when I'm learning new languages. When can I get to the point where I can express what I mean without, feeling constricted, without there being a barrier to understanding what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. So I think we can talk about some of the things that have worked for us. If you haven't checked it out already, we put out a video this week, a lesson about tips for improving fluency in English, and there are 5, and then bonus at the end 2. So a total of 7. So definitely check that out because I think it will give a lot of good insights into what you could be doing right now, today, to just keep getting more and more fluent and having that like mastery of it, having that good grasp on the language.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that worked for me, I remember when I was learning French, and I really immersed myself in the culture and in the language. And you might say, well, that's easy to do when you're abroad. And it's true. It's way easier to do that when you're in a culture and in a country where they speak that language as a primary language. So in France, doing that, it was definitely way easier in the aspect that, when you'd walk down the street, the signs would be in French. When you would ask somebody for directions, they would speak French to you. When, you're completely immersed in that culture. But it makes it a little bit different when it's still possible, but to then immerse yourself when you're not in, so in my example, when I was back in the US and I was still keeping up with the French, that was harder, but it was still possible.
Yeah, for me, what really took my language learning to the next level, my fluency, was conducting business in that language.
Oh, so good. Yeah.
Right? Before, often when you learn a language, it's casual, and you're learning a lot of the colloquial language, and you're speaking it with friends that you might make in those countries. But when you're in a business context, the stakes are a little higher, right? The importance of being understood is greater. And so when you have that kind of accountability, I find personally it really motivates me to get better at expressing myself in that language. And so for me, starting a job where I had to use that language only or primarily made a huge difference. Suddenly, I had this goal, this point that I had to convey, and I had to, make sure that I did all my research to get that across. So this is sort of in the earlier stage of fluency when you're still trying to get that full mastery of the language. I find putting yourself into a professional context where you need it, more so than a social context, is powerful for learning the language.
I love that. It just enhances that intrinsic motivation because, that inner motivation as opposed to an outside sort of like influence. So for the intrinsic motivation to really kick into high gear, you're thinking, well, I want to do well in my job. I want to excel professionally. So, taking on this role, this high stakes role where I really need to be using this language well can make all the difference.
Yeah.
Kind of going back to the casual setting, I think, you can really leverage the power of your social circle of the people that speak the language that you are working on. So for English, right, in this case. And so let's say you do work in a English speaking country as an expat, meaning as someone who comes from another country and is now in the new country of where they work. And, you know, going out to these social settings and saying, look, you know, please let me know if this is the wrong word to use or what word can I say here. Like choose a couple of people or one person that might be sort of helpful in pointing out your mistakes or your mispronunciation or the incorrect use of a collocation or an expression. Because what that ends up doing is we recognize the mistakes we make as opposed to constantly be making that mistake without everyone being able to tell us because they're too afraid and they're too polite. So
that
you
happens
have to,
so often. Yeah, I find, I mean, when I was using Mandarin all the time, I would have these funny little quirks in the way I used it. And I finally ran into someone, a colleague, when I was teaching who was like, you know what? You need to stop doing this and you need to stop doing that. And before then, no one had ever corrected me on that because they were too polite. But this girl was, you know, she did not care. She was happy to tell me, this doesn't sound natural. What you're saying isn't necessarily grammatically wrong, but it doesn't sound natural.
Yeah.
And it's those little nuances, the things that just sound a little funky that separate you from sounding, you know, not fluent to sounding fluent.
Exactly. At this level, it's honestly about making those small tweaks.
Yeah.
Right? It's amazing. And you've come this far, right? Why not just add that little icing on the cake and really go out and practice? Take that job, you know, motivate yourself by, you know, figuring out a way of getting better at your job through that language even and immersing yourself. And so just to revisit that first point, like immersing yourself in the language and in the culture now in a different setting where that language is not the dominant language is still possible. And the way I did it to carry on the French learning for me in the States was I just, you know, inundated myself. I flooded myself with French literature, French news, French media, so movies in particular. And at the time, we didn't have like Amazon streaming or Amazon Prime didn't even exist at that time, nor did Netflix. It existed, but in the form of, do you remember
the discs that you get delivered?
Yeah, so what you'd do is you'd order, I think through the website, and you would get a DVD from Netflix, you'd get a DVD, and then once you finish viewing it, you'd have to put it back in its red packaging and put it in the post box, in the mailbox rather. And so they didn't have any French, you know, movies or films, not like they do today. So I'd order them from this website called La Fnac in French, in France, and it would take a month to get to me. So I'd order like 20 DVDs, and it would take a month to get to me.
Yeah.
My parents actually ordered them, but thank you. But anyway, you know, I'm a high school student, you know. But it's so interesting. Now we have so much more access to immersion.
Totally, yeah. It's, I mean,
Amazing.
If you want to, you could spend your entire day listening to, consuming, and just being in that language environment, right? Which is a huge and very powerful opportunity to really master the way things are saying. And what's also important to realize is that there's fluency in different contexts. I was always better with formal Mandarin.
Which is harder, I would say.
Well, it's maybe more technical or like a little more,
polite.
It's certainly more formal. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's harder. I think you might get more, what's the word, respect for getting good at that side.
Yeah.
But I always felt awkward when I went into these colloquial situations, right? Where it's just
like
meeting a few friends,
food.
ordering food, and talking about, you know, gossip, you know, the stuff that people chit-chat about.
Make small talk about.
That was always something I really struggled with. Whereas I had a friend who was very good at that. And he sounded so natural and would use all these little, you know, pauses and small little mechanics that you probably know the name of and I certainly don't. that just made him sound colloquially very fluent.
Mm.
So it's important to understand what type of fluency you're working toward. And then once you determine which type of fluent you want to be, that's what you start to flood yourself with, right? So if it's the colloquial stuff, maybe focus more so on like live, reality TV shows.
Yeah,
And,
or there are a lot of like great YouTube channels in different like languages too. Like
Yeah.
YouTube is a wonderful
Yeah.
resource,
totally.
right, for language learning.
So
I mean,
just targeting basically the types of media that are the correct context
that's-
for the type of fluency you're trying to achieve.
I love that point. That is such a good point because, as you said, there's different types, right? Where they're using different language registers. So think about the mismatch of having improved your fluency in a very professional context when you're just hanging out with friends. It's going to be like a little jarring, but not as jarring if you start using slang and reality television
Yeah.
talk in like a boardroom, right? Not having recognized, like Greg said, that there are different types of fluency. That
Yeah.
is key, right? So it's really coming down to outlining your goals and what kind of like the capacity in which you want and the context in which you want to use
Yeah.
English, right?
Yeah, I think the final thing I would add is that, and one of the reasons I really like this channel is there are aspects to fluency that don't have to do with vocabulary, that don't have to do with grammar and syntax, right? We were just talking about sort of the context that matters. And it's also just understanding the way that culture thinks, the way that things are done there. And that's something that we address, I think, very frequently on this channel. And if you really want to get fluent in a way that sounds native to that language, that's the best way to just really understand the culture that you're operating in and how they go about doing things.
Exactly. Like, how do they treat humor? Is there satire? Are people sarcastic? Are they very direct? Right? There's so much to unpack, and you're on this journey with us. So we'll be sharing our knowledge and our experience. We both have English teaching backgrounds. We both have worked in cross-cultural settings. We run a communications channel. So it's like all of this wonderful knowledge and the resources and you guys, the people in this wonderful community, right? Just we're all sharing the exchange of knowledge. It's so powerful here.
Absolutely. So hopefully this gave you some inspiration in terms of ways that you can take your fluency to the next level. There's certainly other ways to do it, and of course we'd love to hear from you in terms of what works for you and other strategies for getting your fluency to the next level.
Absolutely. So be sure to share that with us in the comments. So we'll catch you next time for another lesson and another conversation. And keep it right here on Advanced English. And we'll catch you next time. Bye
Bye-bye.
for now.